to the event today. It's incredible. I would see familiar faces. This is our fourth annual event with with your congregation, with Kol Tikvah, and I appreciate that David keeps inviting us back. It's a good sign. We have a good relationship, and I appreciate the courtesy of allowing Jewish National Fund into your congregation and into your lives. Many of you know the organization. Many of you are familiar with the organization, whether it's through tree planting, as a recipient, or as a giver. Some of you know us as the Blue Box people, but we're so much more, and we've been so much more involved in 7 different areas in Israel, whether it's helping people with disabilities, or building communities and moving 300,000 people to the north of Israel, or 500,000 people to the south of Israel. We're changing the landscape in Israel, and we're changing what Israel looks like. There are plenty of organizations out there that help on the military front, on the political front. We build Israel from the inside, and we strengthen Israel on the inside. Tonight, you're going to hear a speaker who's going to deal with an area that most people don't think about, and that's water. Water is a critical element, and we need it for survival. So we're going to start with a really quick video, and then I'll come back and I'll introduce our speaker tonight. So please sit back and enjoy a very brief video.
We're lowering this apparatus down under the ground to see if we can find water there. We're waiting for a siren to go off.
JNF USA is here in Chalutza helming the water drilling deep down into the aquifers to tap into the water that's necessary to create an agricultural oasis in the middle of this desert.
What we're doing here, we're growing a hydroponic lettuce that the water runs in the tunnel. The greens are just sitting inside and growing. This system is a recycling system. We save water by the system. When we came here, there was only sand.
I'm here walking amongst the greenhouses of Chalutza. Even though it looks like a massive agricultural success, they've still had their challenges. They are not connected to the national water grid. They get all of their water from a desalination plant in Ashkelon. That means water is much more expensive.
What type of oranges are these?
These are Valencia.
So all of this is thanks to the recycled water that comes here and you use to be able to grow these really tall trees. What are all these fruit doing on the ground?
I drop them down in order that the tree will live with the less water.
You're picking fruit off the tree and throwing it away because what? You don't have enough water for both the fruit and the tree?
Yeah, exactly.
You're telling me you came to the Negev with a Zionist dream.
I came to the Negev to make it bloom. And because we don't have enough water, that's what you see, you know. We are here, and now we close many.
You had to shut down farms, and you shut down your farm here. Why?
Because we don't have enough water.
All my kids grew up in the fields. We all see that growing for your country is beautiful and it's important. If we would have enough water, we could feed our own people.
If you've ever flown to Israel, you notice brown and beige and gray. And then in the middle of the desert, there is an oasis. Jewish National Fund is the reason why, and you're going to hear more about that tonight. I'm going to introduce our speaker. Before I do, I want to recognize my colleague, Leslie Perry, who is our event manager, helping out behind the scenes tonight. Leslie, thank you. And now I want to introduce our speaker. Talia Tzour has more than 25 years of dedicated service, and she's played an instrumental role in implementing JNF's vision for the land and people of Israel. She's Jewish National Fund's Chief Israel Emissary, and she fosters a close connection between the American Jewish community, the Israeli people, and JNF operations. She oversees JNF task forces on water solutions and cutting-edge development of Israel's Arava region. Tali is a Sabra. She was born in Jerusalem, and she continues the Zionist legacy of her family, who made Aliyah from all over the world to play their part in establishing the state of Israel. I present to you my colleague, a great ball of energy, Talia Tzour. Tali, take it away.
Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you, everyone. And I'm glad to be with you tonight. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll talk about JNF and water and the solutions and Israel. Let's start from the beginning. Hold on. Oops. Okay. So, first of all, we're watching now a picture that was taken probably in 1901 in the Fifth Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. JNF was established 120 years ago this month in January. So we're celebrating our 120th anniversary. And as Ronnie indicated, and it's already the fourth, I understand that this is the fourth session that you're holding with the JNF. So you're familiar with the JNF, but I'm sure if I'll ask any one of you or your friends or your colleagues or your family members, what do you know the JNF for? Everyone will answer immediately, JNF is the Trees Organization. So yes, we're 120 years ago old. Yes, we are the forester, the national forester of the land and the state and the people of Israel. But that was not the reason for why we were established 120 years ago. We were established by the Zionist Congress so that there will be a tool, there will be an organization that will go to the land of Israel, purchase land in the land of Israel for the Jewish people so that when they make Aliyah and they come to Israel, they have a land to settle on and to build on and to build their life. And JNF was established exactly for that reason. The only reason that we started to plant trees, and you know, this month is Tu B'Shvat. 2 weeks from now, we're going to celebrate Tu B'Shvat, which is the new year for the trees. But that was not the reason. But I'm reminding you, back then, we had the Ottoman Empire and then the British Mandate. And in order to prove our ownership of the land, we had to cultivate the land. And the easiest and the cheapest way to do that was to plant trees in the land of Israel. So to cut a very long story short, yes, we have planted trees and we're still planting trees. Every winter, January, February is the planting season. No irrigation because there's no water, and we'll talk about it in a second. Yet we've covered the face of Israel with 250 million trees, covering about 5% of the land of Israel, making the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, the largest green environmental organization in Israel. But that's not only the trees, and that's not the end of the story. It's only the beginning of the story. Because JNF is a Zionist organization that deals with the development of the land of Israel on behalf and for all the Jewish people everywhere, in Israel and in the diaspora. And therefore, JNF has taken upon itself to develop and improve the life for the Israelis and for people who make Aliyah, both in the south and in the north, in the Negev and in the Galil and in the Golan, especially in these areas and not in the center of Israel, because we believe that the future of the young generations is going to be in these areas, in the Negev desert and in the Galil area. And that's why when you look around today, and I don't know who has spoken before me, the 4 or the 3 other sessions that you've already heard, but if you look at the variety of the JNF deeds in Israel, then you see land infrastructure and land cultivation, and you see water, and you see medical centers, and you see sport areas, and you see R&Ds, research and development facilities, and you see facilities for people with disabilities, and you see the largest indoor playground in Sderot, and so on and so forth. And everything, if you connect all of these dots, you create one big puzzle that is called one of the best Zionist organization that develops and improves the life in Israel in these areas, so that we can bring 500,000 people to move from the center of Israel to the Negev, and 300,000 people to move from the center of Israel to the north, to the Galil. And from that, I'm moving to the topic of us here tonight, water. I would start by saying not only, miracles do not occur every day, but also after oxygen, the most important, I would say, commodity for human being is oxygen, is water. You cannot live without oxygen, but you can also not live without water. And if we look around, and I'm going to take you to the macro now for a few minutes, because to understand what the Jewish National Fund is doing in Israel, you need to understand the situation in Israel. And to understand the situation in Israel, you need to understand what's going on around the world. And we're all sharing the same issues and the same water scarcity, some more, some less, but that's going to be a main problem all over the world, not only in the Middle East, not only in Israel. World's population is growing. World's population in the 20th century has tripled itself, but the water demand has grown by 6 times and will grow by more, because the level of life is rising, and the more or the higher the level of life is, the more water we consume. Not only because we drink more, not only because we eat more, because everything that we are consuming, starting with the laptop that I'm speaking with now, the chair that we're sitting on, the clothing that we wear, the cars that we're driving, and everything around this world requires water. You cannot produce anything and do anything without water. So if the level of life is rising, so is the demand for water. And the world's population will be still growing, and by the end of this century, it will be 10 billion people, guys. For that, the world needs to prepare. Do the world prepare? Not sure, but for sure, there is one country that is preparing itself, from the beginning of the 20th century. So within 15 years, 60% of the world will face shortage of water. 40 out of 50 states in the United States will experience a shortage of water within 10 years. What will it result? Political instability, mass migration, and rising of food prices. These are main factors in our life. And before we're moving to Israel, let's just look at this pie and understand the consumption of water. 65, in average, 65% of the water around the world goes for agriculture. 25% goes for industry, and only 10% goes for domestic use. That means that as much as we want to save water in our shower or when we're washing the dishes, that's not sufficient, because most of the water goes for agriculture. So we need to find solutions and ways to save water in that field to begin with. Then we should think about the industrial use and the domestic use. That's the average, and there are countries that use even 95% of their water for agriculture. So I'm taking us another step into our neighborhood, into the Middle East. And of course, I don't need to explain, all the yellow area represents the arid land, and Israel, of course, is in the center of this arid land. Not the best neighborhood around the world, right? Although we have kind of a peace with Egypt and decent relations, I would say, with Jordan. We have in our neighborhood Iraq and Iran and Lebanon and Syria and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. The entire area suffers from the same water shortage, but Israel is the only country that out of necessity, because of its location, because it is surrounded by 22 Arab countries, always have to be self-sufficient in terms of water and agriculture. And that's why Israel had no other choice but to find and to create and to produce and to innovate solutions for this water scarcity. So the former ambassador, Israeli ambassador to the UN, Ron Prosor, said, many countries may not support us, but the world is thirsty for our knowledge. On one hand, there's a market for bias against Israel. On the other hand, there's also a demand for Israeli know-how, and we have the supply. So let's see what Israel has. In 1948, when Israel was established, there were about 600,000 people living in Israel. And the British mandate limited the Aliyah quota because they said you don't have water for more than 1 million people. So you cannot bring more than 1 million people to this country, to this land. Today, Israel supplies water to 12 million people, including 9 million people who live in Israel, including Jordan and including the Palestinian Authority, and that with 50% less precipitation than what we had in 1948. This is important factors, I'm repeating them. From 600,000 people, we grew to 9 million people in Israel, and we supply water to 12 million people, and that with 50% less precipitation than what we had in 1948. So how did we do that? First of all, Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, and the government announced water as a national asset. Water belongs to the country. Even if you own a very large land and there's wells and there's water and there's aquifer, you do not own the water assets. The country owns it. The country drills, the country treats, the country charges, the country produces. The state of Israel owns the water assets, and everybody has to pay for the water and its production. Second of all, it was decided that Israel will encourage water technology, and that's a very long story of success. We will touch it in a second. Education, all of Israel's schools, Israeli TV, commercials, songs, rain, rain, please come, Geshem, Geshem, bo, not rain, rain, go away. All of that is focused on water saving and water awareness so that people will use water smartly, efficiently, and carefully. Every child in the kindergarten at the age of 4 or 5 knows that there's water scarcity because of the education, because of the public awareness, and everybody treat water with so much respect. And then about 20 or 25 years ago, when the population, I'm reminding you, in Israel has grown by almost 1 million people every decade, sometimes more with the Aliyah from Russia and from Ethiopia. Every decade by more than 1 million people, the only solution when you run out of water was to treat wastewater, the sewage, and to produce good water for the agriculture. And by that, saving the drinking water or the natural water, the sweet water from the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, and instead of using that for agriculture, let's use the treated sewage in Israel. Today, Israel produces or treats about 85% of its wastewater is recycled. 85%, that makes Israel #1 in the world in recycling. 85% of the sewage in Israel is recycled. After Israel comes Spain with only 17%, and in the United States, even less than 5% is recycled and used as treated water for agriculture. Israel is #1 in the world, as you can see, as we have mentioned, and all of this treated water is stored in the Jewish National Fund 250 water reservoirs that we've built throughout the country. Let's see a few pictures. This one is in the Lower Galilee. This one is in the Negev Desert. Today, these two reservoirs that you see over here, in fact, there's a third one, are located in the Besor, by the Besor River in the Negev, and they are surrounded by groves and orchards of all the oranges that used to grow in Jaffa. There are no more orange groves in Jaffa. All of them have moved to the Negev, and they could be planted in the Negev desert because there are water reservoirs with recycled water that water these trees and orchards. This one is another one in the Lower Galilee by Mount Tabor, and that's it. Then we spoke about water technology. There are over 1,000 startup water technologies in Israel. This is a very fast-growing field. Israel is known, as a startup nation, but water tech nation is the other name that we should name it, because there are so many companies. Whether you speak about leaks detection, drip irrigation. You can water today a field in China when you have a sensor in the field that broadcasts through the cloud to an Israeli company that sits in Kiryat Shmona, and they can tell the farmer in China when to water the plant, how much minerals to give the plant, how often, whether it's going to be in the morning or at night, or sometimes only 40 or every 48 hours. And that's according to the transmission of data from the roots of the plant in China through the cloud to the water technology company in Israel. So there are over 1,000, but I think the most popular, or the one that everybody heard of, is the drip irrigation company by the name of Netafim, that is located in Kibbutz Hatzerim in the Negev, near Beersheba. They didn't have water, so they had to find solutions for their own fields, and they adopted it, and they thought it was a very simple technology of taking pipes and doing some drips in these pipes and trying to control, the water, and maybe sometimes install the pipes underneath the soil so that they will not lose water for evaporation. And to cut a very long story short, this company today worth billions of dollars. It was sold. This is the smartest agriculture technology, because by using it, not only will you save the water that you don't have, and I'll remind you about farmers that are not in Israel in a second, but also you're increasing the yield. Not only will you use less water, you will double the yield and sometimes triple the yield and make more money of every square or every acre that you have over there. So it's not a cheap technology, but if, I would say poor farmers in Asia or in Africa, and those that are flooding their fields in order to water their crops will use drip irrigation, they will save an asset that costs them a lot and will increase not only the yield, but also their profits from the crops that they're selling. So water technology in Israel is an amazing field, and Israel is bringing, and people are coming all year long, not during the COVID times, to learn from the companies in Israel what they can adapt, what they can purchase in order to improve their industry. Then about 15 years ago, water scarcity in Israel was really horrible. Drought in Israel was terrible. We approached Turkey, can you imagine, Erdogan, and asked him to import water from Turkey to Israel, and luckily he said no. And that left Israel with only one solution, with desalination, another technology that was invented in Israel, but was too pricey for Israel to build and to develop it on the land, but there was no other chance but bringing private companies to invest in building 5 desalination plants along the Mediterranean. What is desalination? It's a very simple process. It's pumping water from the sea, from the Mediterranean, which is salty water, by reverse osmosis, by a water technology. Within 30 minutes, you take the brine out of the water, and you only keep 50% of it as drinking water. And the brine is being sent back to the sea, to the Mediterranean. So these 5 desalination plants along the Mediterranean produce 60% of the water, or drinking water in Israel today for their homes. By that, again, not only do we use the water of the sea, we can stop pumping water from the Kinneret, the main natural source of water for Israel for decades, because there's no inflow of water into the Kinneret, and there's no outflow of water from the Kinneret because there's no precipitation. By that, we're saving the Kinneret for a rainy day, and we're using the water from the Mediterranean. Last but not least, Israelis we all have a quota of water. If you have 4 people in your family, you have a quota. You always pay more than it costs the government to produce this water, and you are willing to pay for it because you know there's water scarcity in Israel. And by paying more, it allows the Israel Water Authority to improve the systems, to improve the infrastructure, the pipes, the machines, and everything else, so that Israelis will have enough water in their homes, in their industry, and in their agriculture. Just by comparison, guys, Jordan, our neighbor, has water in their faucets only once a week. Only once a week. Israelis can have as much water as they want, yet they pay. And also another interesting fact is that in 1994, when Israel signed the peace treaty with Jordan, it was agreed by Israel that we will supply every year 50 million cubic meter of water, of good water from the Kinneret, from the Sea of Galilee, and take it and transfer it to Jordan. Because we did understand their water scarcity, their water needs, and we did want to support. What we didn't know back then, 25 years ago, we didn't know that we're gonna have such a severe drought ourselves, and there will be no water in the Kinneret. 2 years ago, the Kinneret looked like a swamp. But we still gave the water that we promised Jordan in order to support them. And we're doing more than just giving them water, or the Palestinian Authority. Israel, remember that, is always willing to support our neighbors, including the Palestinian Authority, the people in Gaza, including Jordan and everyone. First of all, because we believe in Tikkun Olam, in healing the world, in supporting the world, not only ourselves. And second of all, one more important fact that we need to remember: water has no borders. Water is underneath the ground. There's underground water called aquifers. We have 4 aquifers that know nothing about borders. We're sharing aquifer with the West Bank. We're sharing an aquifer with Lebanon. We're sharing an aquifer with Gaza. And, you know, our neighbors can pump the water from the aquifer as much as they want. It will ruin the aquifer for generations, because once you pump too much, the water will become very saline, and then you ruin it for hundreds of years. You cannot fix it. So it is our interest, not only that they have, you know, sufficient water for themselves, but also to protect together with them the aquifer. So we're willing to teach the Palestinians in the West Bank as to how to build water reservoirs and recycle the water, so that they do not use the aquifer and they do not run the sludge of their industrial use into the rivers that run from Hebron Mountains directly into the rivers in Israel. Because, as I said, water has no boundaries. Water we share with our neighbors, and it's our interest to support them. So to finish this section, 60% of the drinking water in Israel come from the desalination plants, and more than 50% of the water used for agriculture comes from the recycled water, reminding you that is stored in 250 water reservoirs that the Jewish National Fund built around the country. I find this slide of the, you know, of the growth forecast of Israel one of the most important slides that we can look at today, because, you know, we're all, whether you know, we're in Israel or in Florida or in Los Angeles or anywhere in the world, we're Jewish people who part of our life is over here, and part of our heart and soul and beliefs and future is in Israel, and we're all partners in that. And luckily, population in Israel has grown through the years, and luckily, we're predicting that the population, not with the Jewish National Fund, the state of Israel states that by 2050, population will grow in Israel to almost 16 million people. Guys, 16 million people. We're at 9 today. We were 600,000 people in 1948. We're growing. Do I need to translate it? No, because we all understand. Population is growing. You need more communities. You need more land. You need more houses. You need more water. You need more education. You need more playgrounds. You need more medical centers. You need to prepare for this today. We cannot wait until it happens. And that's our share. That's our partnership. And we wouldn't have enough water if Ben-Gurion and his government wouldn't think of the water asset and build the national water carrier and announce water as a national asset in Israel. And the generations in 2050, and we may all, live long life to see it happening, but we want to see the generations and the growth of the growing population in Israel having sufficient water. And when we say water, we say food, right? We say agriculture, and we say life, in other words. So today, we should think about the tomorrow. So how do we close the water gap? To cut a very long story short, by water saving, right? Water awareness, water saving, commercials, education, and so forth. By wastewater reuse, 85% can easily grow to 95%. And I'm reminding you, the more people we have, the more sewage we have. The more sewage we have, the more potential water for agriculture we have. What we need to build, though, is more 80 to 90 water reservoirs throughout Israel to make it happen. Each reservoir is $3 million, $4 million. The government pays about 60 to 70%, and the Jewish National Fund has helped with millions of dollars building all of these reservoirs. As to desalination, that we have seen is the #1 producer for drinking water in Israel. Israel is planning now another 2 desalination plants along the Mediterranean, one in Akko and another one in Sorek, in the center of Israel, and another joint venture with Jordan in Aqaba, a desalination plant in Aqaba that will supply water to the Arava area, the southernmost area in Israel. And in return, the Jordanians are planning to get more water from the Kinneret. So what is Jewish National Fund's role in all of that? Through the years, we've added about 15% to Israel's water economy by building 250 water reservoirs, and we needed to build another 90. Rehabilitation and restoration of rivers. How is that connected to water? Israel has 31 rivers. None of them, is the Mississippi or the Missouri River, okay? Even the Jordan River, we say, has more reputation than water. We don't have that much water. However, the rivers, even the dry riverbeds, are a transit or transfer of contaminations from the rivers, even if the river is dry, into the aquifer. And the aquifer, I'm reminding you, is another source of good water for everything in Israel. So by rehabilitating, let's say, the Beersheba River, and I hope you've seen it, and if you haven't yet, it's an excellent example of what we took, how we took 15 years ago, a dry riverbed that runs throughout the center of the city of Beersheba, the capital of the Negev, that was filled with garbage from all the contractors in the Negev desert, cleaned it, built promenades along the river, bridges, amphitheater, green lungs and facilities for the entire environment of Beersheba. How contractors came and built new neighborhoods facing this beautiful park, because it is no longer a garbage site, it's a beautiful park. And now we've just inaugurated last year a beautiful lake in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the river of Beersheba, filled with recycled water of the city of Beersheba. I'll show you pictures in 2 seconds. So rehabilitation of rivers is not only to beautify, it's important, and to create or to improve the life of the people who live in these cities, but also is a main factor of cleaning and protecting the water of the aquifers and the rivers that run in Israel. Building treatment and wastewater treatment plants, you know, in small villages, kibbutzim, moshavim throughout the country. Water drillings, one in the north that saved the farmers in the north after last, 5 consecutive years of drought, pumping and drilling water from 1.5 miles underneath the ground, water of 50,000 years old. Hot water that is excellent for the crops in the north, save the farmers. This is a JNF function. Wetlands in army bases such as Ramon Army Base. I spoke about water awareness and water education. We have built 70 rain harvesting systems in elementary schools, teaching about 90,000 students how to collect water from the rain and how to use it in their bathrooms and in their backyards to water their gardens. We're supporting the largest competition for high school kids, international high school kids who innovate, solutions with water and meet once a year in Stockholm to compete, and JNF is supporting the Israelis to come and compete in this competition. And last but not least, research and development. Guys, you cannot live in the Arava or in Chalutza or in Beersheba or even in the Galilee without having the solutions and the recommendations of the research and development centers, because you cannot grow cherry tomatoes or dates or flowers or watermelons in an arid land, in a land that almost 60% of it is a desert. You have to be directed by the research and development as to what to grow, how to water, what should be the yield, and so on and so forth. And all of these R&Ds, all of them throughout Israel, are supported by the Jewish National Fund. So I promised you to see a few pictures from the Beersheba River Park and Lake. So this is the lake. Let's take another look. Can you believe it? That's, it's in the middle of the desert. It's blue water, recycled water in the center of the capital of the desert in Israel. Unbelievable, all made by Jewish National Fund. This is another reservoir located in one of the largest forests. That all the forests were planted by men in Israel. Everything was planted by the Jewish National Fund. But this one is the largest, and it's located in the desert. And even the US Forest Service comes to learn from the JNF foresters how to plant trees in the desert so that they will grow without irrigation and will make a better environment. These are the kids collecting the water from the water tanks of the rain harvesting systems that we installed in over 70 or 80 schools in Israel. So in summary, water scarcity is not over. The Kinneret, our main source of natural water that should be the saving account reservoir of the Israel, is drying up, and we should protect it. There are still areas in Israel that are not connected to the national water grid, such as the Arava, such as Chalutza. For them, we need to build wastewater treatment plants and local desalination plants and so on and so forth. Population is growing and will double by 2050. We are located in so-so neighborhood, surrounded by Arab countries. Not everybody likes us, and we always have to remain self-sufficient in food and water supply. We have to prepare today for the next generations. We have to make sure that Israel will be strong and stable with the generations to come. If we do not plan it today, if we do not do it today, by 2050, we will not have sufficient water. I'd like to end the presentation by telling you that water is not just water. Water, yes, it's water for drinking, it's water for agriculture and so on. But water is also have main factor of environmental. If we're thinking of the environment, if we want to protect the environment, treating water, treating the wastewater in Israel, and reusing it is a main environmental factor. Water is also in Israel a great opportunity to change the conversation about Israel. Let's, instead of speaking about the conflicts and the, and the issues that we have over there, let's speak about how positive Israel is for the world, how Israel is willing to share its knowledge and know-how with the rest of the world, how Israel is willing to do a tikkun olam, and we can all be part of it. As Ronnie introduced me, I'm also leading the water campaign of the Jewish National Fund and the Water Task Force, special task force that is dedicated not only to give, but also to be involved in what we're doing in Israel and how we're doing it in Israel. And I'm inviting all of you, if you're interested, Ronnie has material. I'm happy to answer any of your questions and join you into our family. Traditionally, when COVID wasn't part of our life, I used to run every year a water mission for 8 days in Israel and really show the participants everything about water from A to Z, from the north to the south, from the industry and the water technology, all the way to the fields, from the farmers, all the way to the high tech, in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. This year, because of the COVID, I'm running 3 virtual missions. Participants get almost everything that they get on the ground, but without the flying, without spending 8 nights in Israel, and without spending so much money in Israel. It's only 4 days, 2 hours a day only, 12 to 2 o'clock Eastern time. First one has already ended, was very successful. February is filling up. We're taking just a bus. We're almost there. February from 8 to 11, you still have an opportunity to sign up because we still have a few more spots left. And March from the 15th to the 18th. Hearing speakers, visiting desalination plants and wastewater treatment plants and farmers and netafim and so on and so forth, virtually from your home with your laptop, visiting Israel and learning everything about it. So our late president, Shimon Peres, said, we're cultivating fish without water, veggies and lettuce without soil, and we take salt out of the sea and sand out of the desert. This is us. Thank you all. I'm happy, Ronnie, if you want me to answer any questions, I'm more than happy.
Yes, Tali, thank you very much. And I do want to encourage everyone, and I'll put my information, my contact information in the chat, that if you would like to participate on one of our virtual water tours, it is a fabulous opportunity to see Israel and how Israel is solving the water problems in the world, and see it firsthand. So a couple of questions. There's my contact information if you want to reach out to me. On that topic, Tali, first question that was sent to me in the chat, and if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Tali, can you elaborate on how Israel is helping the U.S. and give examples of how states in the United States are benefiting from Israeli expertise?
Okay, so we cannot speak about USA, in general, because there are states in the US, and Israel has MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with different states in the US, such as Arizona, such as Colorado, such as California. But each state, the situation in the United States is different. Some states suffer from really water scarcity. Let's take California, for example. Some states that you don't even think they might suffer from anything, suffer, let's say, from old infrastructure, from leaks. New York City loses every day 80 million cubic meter of water because of leakage in the system every day, and nobody fixing it. But Israel has the solutions of detecting the leaks, of fixing the leaks, of how to do it, digitally. Israel has the solutions not only for states that suffer from shortage of water. Governors from Colorado, from Arizona, from California, not only signed the MOUs, came to Israel. There are collaborations with different companies and with Israel Water Authority to learn from Israel how to do that. Yet, I would say that the United States, if you own a land over here and you have a well or a few wells or an aquifer or whatever, you own it. You can drill, you can pump, you can sell, you can treat, you can decide not to treat, etc., etc. It's your water, it's your asset. And that is a huge problem, because nobody can control, you know, what you're doing with your own land and your own water. And that's why you cannot control and supervise the situation of the water everywhere. And that's a big advantage of Israel, because you know what, Ben-Gurion, while he had so many other issues of building the young state of Israel with so many wars and, you know, enemies, they still thought about water, because they realized if we're not going to have water, we're not going to have life in Israel. So yes, there is a collaboration. Israel also holds a water technology conference every other year, where many of the American states and companies come to Israel to collaborate with Israel. Yet the situation here is different. Also, one more, I'm sure you're asking yourself, there is one desalination plant in California, I think near San Diego, that produces water. And in fact, you can build many more, but Israel's advantage in that case is that Israel is very small. So when you build a desalination plant by any sea, and you need to transfer the water, you cannot just produce the drinking water. And to transfer the water in such a tiny country like Israel, it's an okay issue. You can still do that. But when you are speaking about Texas or California or any other state, you know, big states in the United States, you have an issue because the infrastructure for pumping and transferring the water will cost you more than the desalination plant itself. So that's about the US countries. I saw a question about the Dead Sea, Ronnie?
Yes. Why is the Dead Sea retreating? Why aren't the lakes covered to prevent evaporation?
Okay, Dead Sea is a very sad story, because Dead Sea, its main source was from the Kinneret, right? Can you picture the map of Israel? Just say yes or no. Can you picture the map of Israel? The Kinneret is in the north, the Dead Sea is in the south. Water is flowing from the Kinneret through the southern Jordan River into the Dead Sea. If there is no flow in, if there's a drought in the north, and there is no water, 50% less water than what we had in 48, there is no flow into the Kinneret. So we do not open the Kinneret to flow down into the Dead Sea. And add on that Ben-Gurion, what he also did, he announced, you know, we had the Kinneret, we have sweet water, excellent water to build the country. So let's build a national water carrier, and let's pump water from the Kinneret and take water all the way from the Kinneret to Haifa and Tel Aviv and to the Negev. This is how we build the country. This is how we supply water. So the more you pump from the Kinneret, and the less water the Kinneret has, no matter what, the less water the Dead Sea has. Add to that this is the lowest place on earth, and it's a very hot area, and the Dead Sea loses for evaporation that we have nothing to do. Human cannot do anything with evaporation because of the heat. The Dead Sea loses every year 3 feet of water. Okay, you know what it produces? Sinkholes, huge sinkholes along the Dead Sea and in this entire area that are so dangerous that we don't know if 50 years from now there will be communities like En-Gedi and, you know, in this area by Masada, if we can even drive over there because of the sinkholes. So what is the solution? The solution is to fill the Dead Sea with water. I'm not going to get into the Med Dead Canal, if you heard about it, or the Red Dead Canal, but principally, so that, you know, even everyone can understand it, is to bring water either from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea or from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, okay? But I'm just reminding you one thing. Israel is not the only owner of the Dead Sea, right? There's another country on the other side of the Dead Sea by the name of Jordan, who has their own interest. Okay, they care about the Dead Sea, but they care about water in their faucets that I'm reminding you they have only once a week after the support that they get from Israel. So why would they care now about filling the Dead Sea from the Mediterranean if they need water in their faucets? And you cannot save the Dead Sea without the approval of the Jordan because they own half of the Dead Sea. They're on the other side. So they're against bringing water from the Mediterranean through Israel. Let's say that we could, through the Palestinian Authority and everything, building a canal and flowing the water into the Dead Sea, because what will they get? A better Dead Sea? They want water. What is their solution? Let's build a desalination plant in Aqaba across the sea from Eilat, the city of Eilat, produce over there water, good water. Israel will commit to buy all this water. The brine, the salty water that is produced by the desalination plant will run into the Dead Sea, but there is a topographical problem that it needs to go up and not down the hill, okay? So you need energy for that. And it costs billions of dollars. And for any company, private company, because a country alone cannot do that, especially not Jordan, that is one of the poorest countries around the world. So to build a desalination plant, you have to have the commitment of the countries to purchase this water for 25 years from now. That's how Israel built 5 desalination plants with a commitment to buy every cubic meter for 50 cents, okay? For 25 years. So they know they have an income. They know they cover the expenses of building this desalination plant. The problem with Jordan is that the World Bank wants to support them. Israel is willing to put the money, but Jordan cannot put the commitment. So even the desalination plant in Aqaba that can potentially solve the problem of the Dead Sea and solve the problem of the Jordanians in their homes, because they're going to give the water to the Arava and the Israeli, and in return they want to get more water from the Kinneret, and Israel is okay with that, but they cannot make the commitment. So the Dead Sea is a huge problem. It's a very sad problem. Half of the Dead Sea is not even natural anymore. These are just, pools with salt because of the salt production by the Dead Sea. And the sinkholes that are created by the evaporation and the running down of the sea itself are very, very dangerous for the entire area. So I have no solutions or good news to share with you. But I can tell you that those who need to know of it know about it. It's still a big problem that hasn't been solved yet. I'm reading the questions, Ron.
Well, before that, I have another question that was chatted to me. If you want to, feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you can chat it to me privately. Do you anticipate wars will be fought in the Middle East over water, and what will the impact be on Israel?
Okay, so in fact, there are many water experts, water figures, academic professors, who say that the next war will be over water. That will be the main reason for the water. But I can also tell you with that, we have, I have a hope, because I believe that if Israel, the big brother, has solutions, whether it's from, treating wastewater or building desalination plants or a water technology or drip irrigation or producing water from the oxygen, from the air by Watergen that is located, I think the Israeli company's branch is located in Florida, I think in Miami. So Israel, those, countries that may fight with Israel over the water will find it more beneficial to make peace with Israel and to find solutions together rather than fighting with Israel and losing the only chance that they have for solutions for their own water scarcity. So that's why water might be a reason for fight, but even better, water can be a reason for making peace in the Middle East.
Okay, last question that I have is, what can we do from 6,000 miles away to help with this issue?
Okay, so what you can do, in fact, Jewish National Fund is the only organization that deals with water infrastructure and water production in Israel, in the United States, in Israel, okay? You can run a research, academic research in a university with the University of Ben Gurion and so on. But to build water reservoirs, to build wastewater treatment plants, to build pipes. Listen, I told you we're 120 years old. We didn't start the water solutions and the water infrastructure a decade ago or 2 decades ago. We started it in 1901 for the first communities. because you cannot build any community in 1901 or 1910 or 1920 without water towers, without pipes, without supplying water to these areas. So Jewish National Fund, from the day of its establishment until this very day and forever, will be the only Jewish Zionist organization that deals with water infrastructure and production in Israel. And if you feel related to Israel, and if you're looking for a great way not only to help Israel, but also to strengthen the communities in Israel and to change the conversation about Israel and to give some support and healing the world, Tikkun Olam, Jewish National Fund is your venue. Support our water campaign and become an integral part of strengthening and building the beautiful country that we have in Israel.
Great. Thank you, Tali. David, you can wrap it up, take it off mute and wrap it up.
Yes, thank you for the really interesting and fascinating presentation. I certainly enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, even though I knew a lot about the issues, and we're getting educated all the time by our own Jerry Sussman, who's very involved with the water projects in Israel and teaching the kids about water conservation. So thank you, Roni, and thank you for Tali for the great presentation. And we look forward to seeing you all on January 24th for our movie discussion, and another movie in February, and our speaker in January. So thank you for joining us, and we wish you all a good night, and stay safe, and say a prayer for Rabbi Boxman.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tali. Thank you, David. Thank you, Leslie. Bye, everybody.